joining us. Okay, so the meeting is being recorded. So if anybody is concerned about that, don't want to be recorded, you can turn off your video, and then you would not be recorded. We have a full schedule tonight. We've got our In Wars and Occupations Action Team. They along with the medical group are the most powerful ones we have here. They're very strong. They know what they're talking about. They working hard for very good reasons, and we're delighted to have this program tonight with our group here. So with that, I would like to go ahead and turn it over to Bill and give him an extra minute and a half maybe to introduce Joni Arends, and from that point on they will be handling it themselves. There will be some time for question and answers, so please hold your questions until they open that period of time for us, and jot them down if it's something you need to remember, but listen to what they have to say, and then there'll be a little bit of time you can speak. So it's over to you, Bill, if you would please.
Thank you. I'm Bill Teewald. I'm the secretary of the Donald and Sally Alice chapter of Veterans for Peace in Albuquerque, and we have members into the central and south of the state as well. Joni is the co-founder of Concerned Citizens for Nuclear Safety. She was a co-founder in 1988. Concerned Citizens is a nonprofit organization that was founded because of community concerns about nuclear waste transportation from Los Alamos National Lab, the nation's oldest nuclear weapons production facility, to the waste isolation pilot plant. The nation's first permanent nuclear weapons waste repository. Joni has literally spent half her life working for Concerned Citizens. She went to law school and has a current law license, and although she doesn't actually practice law for a living, she focuses on this work for clean water, clean soil, and also for proper nuclear waste burial. She works to oppose all nuclear weapons production expansion at LANL and transfer LANL's weapons programs to better align with post-Cold War realities and international efforts to cease the proliferation of nuclear weapons. And with that, I give you Joni Arends.
Thank you, Bill, for the kind introduction. I'm going to share my screen. Share. Okay. So I'm going to talk about the proposed expansions of Los Alamos National Laboratory and the waste isolation pilot plant. And I want to thank you so much for this opportunity to let you know about what's going on. I'd like to talk about New Mexico's at the nuclear crossroads, and we really need to be active in order to make sure that we're choosing the right direction. I'm going to talk about expansion at Los Alamos that includes plutonium pit production, and also the discovery of the forever chemicals, or the PFAS, in the environment at LANL. Expansion at WIPP about the proposed shaft and associated drifts in the public hearing. And we are expecting a decision in October 2021, and then a section on what you can do to get involved. So I know there's a lot of people from New Mexico here, but I wanted to point out where Los Alamos is located, to point out the Rio Grande River here. Can you see my little thing that's outlining the river? The little symbol here? Maybe not.
Yes, we do see it.
Okay, great. So you can see that the laboratory is surrounded by San Ildefonso, Santa Clara, as well as Jemez Pueblo and Cocha de Pueblo down here. And the part of the laboratory that I'm going to be talking about is Area G, which is right along this border with San Ildefonso Pueblo. Next slide. So Los Alamos are proposing to increase the number of plutonium pits, which are the triggers for nuclear weapons, from 20, which they were authorized in the late 1990s, to 30 pits per year. And today's newspaper reports that they may be going up to 80 pits per year if the plans to expand the Savannah River site in South Carolina don't come to fruition. Wanted to provide you with some information about the Defense Nuclear Facility Safety Board, which is an independent agency created by Congress in the late 1980s to oversee the DOE sites around the country. This is a very good resource, reliable source of information. And because Los Alamos was formed in 1943, there's been a lot of contamination at the laboratory, both in the air, in the water, and in the soil. So this photograph is that discharge pipe from the radioactive liquid waste treatment facility, and they have found PFAS, the fire retardant or the fire foam chemicals all across the laboratory. And this pipe being connected to the plutonium facility and other similar facilities is a location for discharge of the PFAS into the environment. Next. So now we're gonna go down towards the east to Area G. This is a photo of Area G, the largest dump at Los Alamos, and I call them a dump because this waste is buried in unlined pits, trenches, and shafts on the Pajarito Plateau above the Rio Grande. This photo is looking west towards the Jemez Mountains. These tents during the fire, the Cerro Grande fire, 21 years ago, contained 40,000 drums of plutonium contaminated waste from plutonium pit production. This is a photo of the drums that are ready to be shipped to the waste isolation pilot plant near Carlsbad. This photo is of the waste isolation pilot plant. This tower here is for the waste hoist that takes the waste down to the underground in the WIPP site, which is 2,150 feet below the surface. As Bill said, that this facility is exclusively for plutonium contaminated waste or transuranic waste, meaning that they're particles heavier than uranium. So they're transuranic, meaning plutonium and americium and other in the periodic table. So this is located 2,150 feet below the surface. It's 26 miles northeast of Carlsbad, New Mexico. These are the rooms where the waste is currently stored. They're currently working on filling up these spaces, but now they have a proposal to build 12 of these rooms right here off of the proposed new shaft. And this is a little known fact. WIPP is located in the Permian Basin, sometimes called the Saudi Arabia of the US. And I'd like to show you some of our concerns are associated with the number of oil and gas wells that are located within the 16 square mile area of WIPP. There's actually wells that are drilled underneath the WIPP site, slant wells as well as wells that go down and then are horizontal. So waste comes not only from Los Alamos and Sandia labs, but also from Livermore, from Hanford in Washington State, from Idaho State, from not anymore, but they did ship a lot of waste from Rocky Flats. Waste is coming from South Carolina in Savannah Riverside and the Oak Ridge National Laboratory, as well as the Pantech site in Amarillo. You can see that the trucks follow the interstates mainly. When we started CCNS in 1988, DOE told us that the Department of Energy said we're going to be able to clean up all of those sites around the country in 25 years. We're going to be able to repackage that waste, ship it in the containers, and get it to WIPP in 25 years, and then we're going to close. And so when they opened in 1999, that means that they're supposed to close in 2024. But now DOE has a plan to stay open beyond 2024. And they were supposed to start clean and stay clean, but then they had an explosion in 2014 that shut down the facility for 3 years, almost 3 years. And now they're trying to ramp up again. So DOE in other documents has said that they're going to ship plutonium pit production waste to WIPP, as well as high level waste or spent nuclear fuel. This is in addition, this is the defense high level waste, as opposed to the proposal to bring all the commercial spent nuclear fuel to the Holtec site or to the waste control specialist site on the Texas-New Mexico border. They plan to bring commercial waste as well as 34 metric tons of surplus plutonium. So I'd like to show you those transportation routes as well. This is a convoluted scheme. Right now at the Pantech site north of Amarillo, Texas, which is located north of Amarillo, Texas, they would take the pits that are reserve or in storage. There's 14,000 pits over at Pantech site, and they'll bring them to Los Alamos for processing. Then they need to ship them all the way back to the Savannah River site in South Carolina in order to do more processing, and then they'll ship it to WIPP. That's 3,300 miles of transportation of these pits, which is of concern, especially for New Mexico. You can see that we have three different routes into New Mexico or out of New Mexico here. So the reason that we know about those routes and the other things are in these documents that DOE has not provided to the New Mexico Environment Department, which is the regulator of the WIPP site. And then just one final point about WIPP, or two final points about WIPP. Under the laws that were passed from 1979 to 1996, DOE was charged with finding other repositories around the country. And the reason was so that the risk wouldn't be all in one place, that there would be less transportation. If there were regional dumps as opposed to just one dump, that there would be less transportation, there would be less cost, and the burden would be shared. But DOE has not done what they were supposed to do as early as they were told to do as early as 1982. And now we're being this imposition on for New Mexicans to take all of this defense waste from around the country. So there's some things that can be done in the next 2 months or so. So I'd like to talk about that next. You can sign up to receive our weekly CCNS news update at nuclearactive.org. You can listen to our update, which is broadcast on KUNM on Saturday night around 6:55 between alternative radio and the music show that starts at 7. Contact your elected officials about your concerns, write letters to the editor. Then there's some events that are coming up, including the Triennial review. So under the Clean Water Act, states are supposed to review their surface water regulations to make sure that they're still in compliance. And that hearing is going to start the week of July 13th. The reason that this is mandated for the review every 3 years is to make sure that the standards are as protective as possible. This triennial review will include looking at emerging contaminants, as well as the PFAS that we see at LANL and at other military sites, including Cannon and Holloman. There's proposals about changing the definition of climate change, which is huge as we move from drought into other conditions. As when we have contamination in water, surface water, with less water, the concentrations increase because there's less water. There's less water to dilute it, which creates new problems. CCNS will be organizing sample comment letters and talking points for people to be able to participate in this virtual public hearing. It's important to have a lot of people come out and talk about their concerns. And then finally, I want to let you know that the Tularosa Basin Downwinders Consortium has decided to hold a in-person candlelight vigil of the Trinity test and to honor those that have been harmed by the Trinity test 76 years ago. And that's going to be on the Tularosa Little League field in Tularosa. And for more information, you can go to trinitydownwinders.com. And then here's my contact information. And please contact me with any information or questions or concerns or organizing opportunities with all of this. So I know that you can go, I know that Greg Mello and the Los Alamos Study Group, as well as Nuclear Watch New Mexico, have a lot of information about the different weapon systems and the proposals for LANL, as well as the Alliance for Nuclear Accountability has an 8-page fact sheet, which goes into much detail about the weapon systems. CCNS is more interested in the impacts from those activities. And because Jay and Greg know much more, we focus on the environmental impacts and the public health impacts. So does anybody have any questions, or did I run out of time already?
You're still good. We have 7 minutes for Q&A. There's some comments and questions in the chat window. If you would actually copy your contact information from that slide and drop it into the chat window, that would be a good way to get people that information as well. And so once you're done sharing your screen, I'm going to go ahead and remove your spotlight so people will see the gallery view, and then we'll address some of the questions.
Okay, should I stop the share then?
Yes, please.
Okay, great.
Great, so I'm going to remove your spotlight and go back to gallery view. And so, Catherine, you had posted a question in the chat window. Do you want to ask that question? And Marcy, you had a comment. So, Catherine, if you go first.
Yeah, thank you so much, Joni. I have followed this issue somewhat, but definitely not as much as I should be.
Okay.
And so this is really, really important information, useful information. I'm just really shocked by what looks like a crazy plan to move the pits all the way across the country and back, obviously, because, you know, more and more communities are fighting back and don't want nuclear storage in their own communities. I'm sure that's a big part of it. And we're kind of stuck with a lot of it. But I guess my question is, and I put it in there, is what kind of is the worst scenario risk analysis as far as, you know, I'm assuming it's being shipped in large trucks. What kind of security? Would it be open to some kind of domestic terrorism? What about crashes or, you know, and what could happen if something went wrong? Kind of worst case scenario.
It would be really bad. It's the worst case scenario. We have very many sensitive populations in New Mexico. It could result in genocide depending on where it happened. That's the worst case scenario in my view. And I don't like to talk about those things. I think the worst case scenario is that the Department of Energy has come to New Mexico to colonize us. And they're doing a really good job. Under the previous administration, an extra $1 billion was funded to LANL for pit production. We're waiting to hear about what Joe Biden's going to do with regard to the nuclear posture review, which is supposed to come out. They're supposed to start next month. And that's a document where the new administration looks at how many weapons are needed. And under the previous administration, those numbers were increased. Old proposals from George, the first Bush administration came back. And the weaponeers just got really excited about the possibility of doing that. With the election coming up in 2022, we have a real opportunity to educate our elected officials about these issues, to talk about the burdens that New Mexicans have already taken on, that many people were hurt as a result of the early years of the Manhattan Project, and that harm has continued. That the other thing is that as your committee, that you stop wars and occupation. You know, I'd love to work with you more and figure out how to attend your meetings to be able to talk about that, because so many people are talking about the nuclear occupation here in New Mexico. And it's time to kick them out because they told people that they would only be here for a short amount of time. And that model that they created at Los Alamos, they're duplicating at WIPP to say we were going to be here for 25 years. And now we're going to stay basically forever till 2080. Some of those documents say 2080. And so we need to push back. We need to make nuclear weapons a campaign issue for 2022 and talk about alternatives to this.
We have another question that I'd like to get to. So thank you for that question, Catherine. Thanks for the Joni for the answer and the emphasizing the importance of political pressure to get them out. Pat Bartel had a question. What was the original agreement about oil and gas wells in the area, and have they exceeded that limit?
You know, the gas and oil wells were there before WIPP opened. And what happened is when they created the land withdrawal area, the 16 square miles, then gas and oil came to the edge because that's such a predicted area. It's important to know that Fasken Oil, Fasken, is opposing the Holtec proposal because they realize the damage that could be done to gas and oil if there's a nuclear accident of any kind. So that's a positive. How we get them to help us with WIPP is really important. Fasken Oil has sent in contentions, which are arguments in opposition to the whole tech proposal, which are being listened to by a host of people. But we need to be as active as we were 30 years ago or 33 years ago when WIPP was first proposed. What's really interesting is that people don't know what WIPP is anymore. You know, new people that have moved into the state. So we have an opportunity to educate them. And then just one final thing, you know, in some sense, DOE is holding the state hostage, if I can use that term, by, you know, saying we're going to keep WIPP open, but at the same time, look at all these jobs that we get at LANL and at Sandia as well, with the Space Command being there. And we have to look at all of these different moving pieces around the state.
Great. Thank you for the great presentation.
Thank
We're
you.
going to go to our next presentation. Sally Alice is going to do an introduction of Bruce and his short bio. And so I'm going to spotlight Sally Alice. Okay, Sally Alice, you're on for your intro.
It's really an honor to me to be able to introduce the co-founder and the coordinator of Global Network Against Nuclear Weapons in Space. Bruce has been active in this subject since 1992, when he started the Global Network, and he was in the he was organizer of the Cancel Casino campaign, and since that time he has devoted his life to this subject, and he has become so well recognized that he's been asked to speak in almost every continent in the world, and many countries. And in 2006, he was recipient of the Spock Peacemakers Award, and he is a voice in the wilderness, telling people what we're not supposed to know. He's been censored several times, but he continues to broadcast the truth. He is a truth teller, and he's very active. He has personally witnessed the damage and the dangers of the American colonization of Jeju Island, which is part of South Korea, and Okinawa, where we have military and naval bases to the extent that people are not able to make their living there anymore. And also, he has observed what's going on in the Ukraine, which is exactly diametrically opposed to what the mainstream media tells us. So it's my honor to introduce Bruce Gagnon.
Thank you, Sally Alice. I'm going to take us back to gallery view and then spotlight Bruce. And Bruce will be also sharing his screen to do a PowerPoint presentation. So take it away, Bruce.
Thank you, Sally Alice, and thank you all for inviting me very much. I appreciate it. I'm going to share my screen. I've been working actually on space issues since 1982, but we founded the Global Network Against Weapons and Nuclear Power in Space in 1992, as Sally Alice said. This is just a review slide to show you the things I'm going to be talking about. Thousands of 5G satellite launches, growing problems of space debris, rocket launch pollution impacts on the ozone layer, exacerbating climate crisis, the military role of 5G, US encirclement of Russia with so-called missile defense systems, UN treaties to ban weapons in space, and Operation Paperclip, the Nazi role in the US space program. Some of you probably know about that. You might have heard that Elon Musk has been given permission from the FCC, the Federal Communications Commission, along with other space entrepreneurs, to launch more than 30,000 5G satellites into space. As a result of all of this, orbits are becoming increasingly crowded and more dangerous. Essentially, think of space orbits around the Earth as parking lots that are filling up. And when parking lots fill up, you start having cars bump into each other. And soon we'll be having satellites doing the same thing, cascading collisions, where when that happens, we're in big trouble. Almost everything we do on the Earth is connected to satellites now, whether it's cell phones, cable TV, GPS, weather prediction, ATM machines. And so when you start having this cascading problem in space, the Earth essentially goes dark because the satellites start crashing and smashing into each other, and things go dark back here on the planet Earth. So not something we want, but right now the FCC isn't regulating properly, nor is anyone else, this growing problem in space. In addition, every time you launch a rocket, the exhaust from it is creating serious problems. At Cape Canaveral in Florida, the Kennedy Space Center, every time they do a rocket launch, they have significant bird and fish kills. And now there's because of all these launches, they're wanting to have more launch facilities all over the world: Kodiak Island, Alaska, Boca Chica on the Gulf of Mexico and Texas, and many, many, many other places, New Zealand, Scotland, the list is endless. So in all of these places, there's going to be contamination on the ground, in the air, but also the ozone layer gets depleted as this toxic fuel begins to eat away at the Earth's ozone layer that protects us from the sun's rays. So it will exacerbate climate change. 5G has serious military implications, or applications rather. 5G will speed up the military's capability to surveil the people on the planet and target everyone on the planet, particularly with drone strikes, but every other kind of attacks as well. Elon Musk and others are saying they want to have a orbiting satellite over the head of every single human being on the Earth, 24 hours a day, 7 days a week. That many satellites orbiting the Earth. So imagine that every single person 24/7 will be able to be surveilled by the Pentagon, and if they want to take you out. Military satellites today control everything the Pentagon does. All warfare on the Earth is coordinated and directed by military satellites, no matter whether you're a troop on the ground, in a tank, on a Humvee, you're on a ship in the ocean, you're on an airplane, or you're firing missiles. Everything is coordinated by space technology. In addition, the nuclear industry views space as a new market, and they are dying to launch all kinds of different nuclear missions, nuclear-powered mining colonies on the moon and Mars, nuclear rockets to Mars. Sally Alice mentioned the Cassini campaign in 1997 that launched 72 pounds of plutonium on board. They fabricated the generators at Los Alamos. This article here reports that during the time when they were doing that fabrication of the generators, the plutonium generators, they had 244 cases of worker contamination. So it's not just a launch accident that we fear. that would release plutonium and or uranium into the atmosphere, but it's also the entire production process is problematic as well, something that you all understand very clearly. This is a document put out by the U.S. Space Command in 1997, Vision for 2020, where they talk about the United States must control space and dominate space and deny other countries access to space. They say the United States must be the master of space. And this is the Air Force Space Command headquarters building in Colorado Springs, Colorado. This is a dangerous and provocative idea and strategy that we will be the master of space. 5% of the world's population, we're going to control and dominate space and deny other countries access to space. The origins of the space program, I think, are very important to always remember. Operation Paperclip following World War II, where the US smuggled 1,500 of the top Nazi operatives into the US. They seeded every part of the military-industrial complex with these Nazis. Werner von Braun in the upper left there in the picture was running the Hitler operation to build the V1 and V2 rockets that were used to terrorize the cities of London, Paris, and Brussels towards the end of World War II. They were using slave labor inside a mountain tunnel, upper right-hand side, called Dora, where they killed more than 25,000 Jews, gypsies, communists, French resistance fighters, as they put them to work building the V1 and V2 rockets. So after the war, von Braun and his rocket team of 100 engineers and scientists were secretly brought to the US, first to Fort Bliss, Texas. 35 of them were stationed at White Sands, New Mexico. And then ultimately they moved the operation to the Redstone Arsenal in Huntsville, Alabama. The picture on lower left is von Braun with Major General Walter Dornberger. He was Hitler's liaison for the rocket operation. He accompanied von Braun to the United States under Operation Paperclip and became the vice president of Bell Aerospace in New York. And in the 1950s, Dornberger testified before the United States Congress saying, "Gentlemen, I didn't come to this country to lose the Third World War. I lost 2 already." And he talked about the need for the United States to have orbiting battle stations orbiting the Earth that would control who could get on and off the planet Earth so that the US would be, quote unquote, the master of space. And so this slogan, master of space, it reminds me of another slogan called Deutschland über alles, Germany over all. And so really what we now see developing within the Space Command and now the creation of the Space Force is this Nazi prophecy coming home to roost. Just near the end of the Trump administration, the Space Force was initiated. At the time, as today, the Democrats controlled the House of Representatives. They could have easily defeated the Space Force, made sure that it was never approved. But the only thing the Democrats asked for during the debate was to call it the Space Corps, like the Marine Corps, rather than the Space Force. On the right is a Major General just from the Space Command, just sworn in at Vandenberg Air Force Base as one of the top leaders of this new Space Force. And behind her here, you see these Star Wars figures, which I think really is kind of a brazen, kind of ugly statement of how the Space Force is trying to sell itself to popular culture as part of this cool idea of Star Wars, the movie, and everything else. But really, I think it speaks to the imperial mission of the Space Force to give the United States control and domination of the heavens. I call it pyramids to the heavens. Some years ago, in one of the industry publications called Space News, they said that Star Wars will be the largest industrial project in the history of the planet Earth. And they said, we have to come up with a dedicated funding source to pay for it. And they said, we have. And we're now sending our lobbyists to Washington to secure it in order to pay all of the cost of everything we want to do in space. And they called this dedicated funding source the entitlement programs that officially are in Washington: Social Security, Medicare, Medicaid, and what's left of the social safety net that is now in tatters today. These are the programs that the aerospace industry has identified for defunding in order to pay for Star Wars. I want to talk to you a little bit about missile defense, because as you all are very concerned, rightly so, about the spread of nuclear weapons, there's no way we're going to be able to get rid of nuclear weapons as long as the United States is introducing so-called missile defense, which is the shield to be used after a US first strike attack happens against Russia and China. In fact, missile defense used to be illegal under the ABM treaty, the Anti-Ballistic Missile Treaty, signed by Richard Nixon and the former Soviet Union. But when George W. Bush became president, he pulled the US out of the missile defense, or out of the ABM treaty, and missile defense systems received a huge amount of money for research and development. When Obama became president during his 8 years, he dramatically escalated the deployment of missile defense on various different components, air, land, and sea, in order to serve as a shield after a US first strike attack. Russia and China have long ago renounced first strike. The United States refuses to do so. But Russia and China have been saying now for about 10 or 12 years that because of missile defense, as much as we'd like to get rid of our nuclear weapons, we can't afford to, because after a US first strike attack, they'll take out some number of our military, of our nuclear capability. And we must have our nuclear retaliatory capability to have a response against the United States. On the left, you see this Aegis warship. It's a destroyer. It's made where I live in Bath, Maine, and it's outfitted with these SM-3 interceptor missiles today that are part of key parts of this missile defense program. And so there are various stages of missile defense, various kinds of, some are ground-based, some are sea-based, and some they hope to have it air-based. And there are all kinds of satellites and ground-based radars that direct this entire program. Today, the United States is bumping up against the coast of Russia by moving into the Black Sea, the Mediterranean Sea, the Persian Gulf, the Barents Sea, the Barents Sea, and other places with these Aegis destroyers, putting them very close to Russia. And so that after a US first strike attack, they would be close enough to try to intercept Russian nuclear retaliatory responses after the US attack. Also, the United States has created a program called Aegis Ashore. In other words, Aegis on the land. Because these Aegis destroyers have the best testing of any of the missile defense programs so far, they're wanting to put this same launch system on land. And so this is a picture of the US opening up a Aegis Ashore ground launch facility in Poland. And another one has been built in Romania. And so at these sites very near the Russian border, then, the United States will have an even better capability to have the shield take out Russian responses after a US first strike attack. Well, you know, during the time of the collapse of the Soviet Union in the early 90s, when George Herbert Walker Bush was president, Daddy Bush, his Secretary of State, Jim Baker, promised Mikhail Gorbachev that NATO will not expand 1 inch towards Russia. And that was an important concession to the Soviet Union, because that then allowed them to not oppose the reunification of East and West Germany. And then the Soviet Union completely dismantled the former Warsaw Pact alliance that they had throughout Eastern Europe. But then when Bill Clinton was president, he began what he called NATO enlargement. We call it NATO on steroids. And so today, NATO has expanded dramatically into Estonia, Latvia, Lithuania, Romania, Bulgaria, Albania, Moldova, Slovenia, Hungary, Poland. All these additional countries, former parts of the Warsaw Pact in Eastern Europe, are now being brought into NATO. And now the United States is trying to get Ukraine, Georgia, and even Belarus. The US sponsored an attempted coup last month in Belarus, being organized by the National Endowment for Democracy and the CIA. It's been proven now that this was attempted by the United States. So if the United States can get NATO into Ukraine and Belarus, imagine how Russia is going to get paranoid at that point. I mean, they're already paranoid as it is. At the same time, with this expansion of NATO, the United States is increasingly doing war games throughout this same region, again, bumping up against the borders of Russia. At the same time, the US and NATO are doing war games in the Nordic region, up in Sweden, Norway, Finland, Denmark, and this whole region as well. In fact, on the left is a picture of Norway, on the right, a picture of Poland. The United States has created new bases in both these countries to serve as weapons depots or weapons hubs, so that every time they ship equipment over from the United States for these war games, afterwards they leave it at these weapons depots in Norway and in Poland, stockpiling weapons for an eventual war with Russia. Also up in the Norwegian area, on the left is a US missile defense warfighting first strike attack radar up in the border between Norway and Russia. The map on the right, you can hardly see it because of the pictures, but where that arrow is, there's a little town called Vardo right there, and it's 40 miles from, or kilometers, I should say, 40 kilometers from a Russian base, which is just to the right over the border. The border is just right next door there to Vardo. And so this is a tremendous, tremendous provocative move on the United States, as it's encircling Russia from really all sides. This Defender Europe US NATO war game is going on at this very moment. And again, they're shipping US military hardware over, using it for the war games, and then storing it at these weapons depots in Poland and Norway afterwards. So what does Russia do? Well, recently, because of these war games, they moved some of their own military close to the border with Ukraine, because the United States has moved a lot of these US NATO war game troops into Ukraine. The United States ran a coup d'etat in Ukraine in 2014, installed a neo-Nazi regime that immediately announced that the people living in the Donbass region of Ukraine, Russian ethnic people living right along the Russian border, right where you see this boot is the Donbass region. And so this new Nazi regime in 2014 that was installed announced as one of their first measures that the speaking of Russian in Ukraine would be illegal from now on. Now, at least half the people of Ukraine speak Russian. And so there were protests all over the country. Nonviolent, peaceful marches, petition gathering attempts saying, we want a federated Ukraine, We want to be able to have our own language. We want to be able to elect our own local officials, not have them imposed on us by this government in Ukraine, in Kiev, supported by the United States and NATO. And so the Nazis, who predominate in Western Ukraine, were sent to the Eastern Ukraine, right around where this boot is in the Donbass region, and they began attacking the people that lived there. Mostly coal mining region. Coal miners came out of the mines, teachers, engineers, electricians, musicians. They armed themselves with whatever they could to try to defend their families. They were called Russian separatists, but in fact, they're Ukrainian citizens who are being attacked just because they speak Russian. So why is all this military encirclement happening of Russia? What is really going on? What's really driving this? Well, because of climate change, the Arctic ice is melting, and soon the oil corporations are going to be able to drill up in that region. So they want access to it and they want control of it. But there's one big problem. Russia has the largest border with the Arctic Ocean. And so that's why they must be demonized. And that's why there must be regime change in Moscow, so that a process of balkanizing Russia, similar to what happened when the United States and NATO attacked Yugoslavia during the Clinton administration and broke it up into smaller countries. The goal now is to bust Russia up into smaller countries. Now imagine, how is Russia going to respond to all this? This could lead to World War III, nuclear exchange, and we're all done, right? But guess who's written the definitive plan on doing this balkanization of Russia? The Rand Corporation. You all heard of them. You remember the Pentagon Papers during the Vietnam War, the secret plan, the secret history rather of the Vietnam War. Well, the same Rand Corporation has created this study that lays out the entire program, and all the elements of this study are now being implemented by the United States today. Encircle Russia, begin to move into the Arctic, to oppose their ability to, deal with resources just off the shore of their own country. It goes on and on and on. But the proof is overwhelming. And so what we have here, friends, is a Cuban Missile Crisis in reverse. Except this time, there's one big difference. The American people don't know anything about it. They don't know anything about missile defense. They don't know anything about the war games going on surrounding Russia. They don't know anything about the Arctic situation going on, and they certainly don't know anything about the Rand Corporation report calling for the balkanization of Russia. The same thing is also happening with China. The United States is expanding its military into the Asia Pacific. And in fact, NATO is now going global. NATO is establishing what they call NATO partnerships with Japan, South Korea, Singapore, Australia, New Zealand, and other countries in the Asia Pacific. Why? NATO is North Atlantic Treaty Organization. Why is it going global? Well, there's a problem, you see, with that pesky organization called the United Nations. Because of the Security Council, when the United States wants to invade a country or do regime change in a particular country, when they go to the Security Council to ask for, to bring a resolution, getting the support of the UN, Russia and China have the ability to block that. And so the United States doesn't want to have to deal with that anymore. So by creating this so-called global NATO, they're going to have what they call an international alliance of partners that will then give them permission, quote unquote, to do these regime change operations anywhere around the world. And so just as Russia's on the hit list, so is China as well. Now, Russia and China, for at least the last 25 or 30 years, I can attest to this because I've been witnessing it every year. They go to the United Nations and they introduce a treaty called PAROS, Prevention of an Arms Race in Outer Space. The Russians and Chinese say, hey, let's create a new treaty to ban all weapons in space. Let's close the door to the barn before the horse gets out. And they offer it as a resolution at the General Assembly, which passes overwhelmingly, usually with the United States and Israel voting against it. It is then sent to the permanent conference, the UN's permanent conference in Geneva for negotiations. And there the United States and Israel completely block any discussion whatsoever about PAROS. The US official reason during both Republican and Democrat administrations for the last 25 or 30 years is, quote unquote, hey, there is no problem. There are no weapons in space. We don't need a new treaty. The old treaty, the Outer Space Treaty of 1967, bans weapons of mass destruction in space. In other words, nuclear weapons. But they're now developing at the Pentagon weapons of selective destruction that fall outside of the legal parameters of the Outer Space Treaty. And thus a new treaty is needed. So let's look at who really is the aggressor these days. Even though every time I swear I turn on NPR, National Public Radio, I hear them going on about Russia and China's aggression. I hear all the time that Russia wants to rekindle the days of the Soviet Union. It wants to take over Europe. Well, let's look at the numbers. The numbers don't lie. This chart is from the Stockholm International Peace Research Institute. And if you look at the bottom on the right, it was printed in Stars and Stripes, the military newspaper. The United States in 2018 spent 36% of the world total in military spending. Look on the right side, go down about 4 or 5 countries, you'll come to Russia at 3.4%. And in fact, the last 2 years, Russia has cut their military spending because Putin said we have too much poverty in our country. We're cutting our military spending. I wish the United States would do the same. But when you go down this list and you add up all the NATO members and the NATO allies, you go down the list and you add all those numbers to the US total, you come to about 60% of the world total. So is Russia at 3-point-something% a real threat to the US and NATO? Is China at 14% a real threat to the US and NATO? I don't believe so.
Bruce, there's about 10 minutes left in your part of the program.
All right, I'm wrapping up. This is my last slide. Let me re-say this. This is a drawing, a piece of art by a friend of mine here in Maine. We've done 5 peace walks up and down the state of Maine in the last several years, always talking about Bath Iron Works and the destroyers that you see pictured on the left, firing their missile defense interceptors. And we talk about the conversion of the military industrial complex at Bath Iron Works. Like New Mexico, like so many other places around the country, Bath, Maine, and the state of Maine is addicted to military production. Some years ago, a guy by the name of Thomas Barnett, then an instructor at the Naval War College, wrote a book called The Pentagon's New Map. And he said that because of corporate globalization of the world economy, in America, we're not going to make things anymore. We're not going to make shoes, refrigerators, cell phones, TVs. It's cheaper for the corporations to go overseas and use cheaper labor. They can maximize profits. Our role, he said, under corporate globalization will be security export. So it's no coincidence that today our local communities are addicted to military production. But when that happens, look what happens to our soul as a nation. We're like alcoholics sitting at the bar, always needing another war, another drink, always needing more conflict around the world. And so that's what we've become. And so we have been running a campaign in our community just today. In fact, I was at Bath Iron Works with 2 others, standing in front of the Navy Gate where the sailors are brought to begin to learn how to work the ships. They live on them while they're still parked at the docks at Bath Iron Works to learn how to operate them. And we were handing out flyers talking about the deadly connection between climate crisis and the Pentagon being the biggest polluter on the planet. So we're always working to talk about converting the military industrial complex. Last year in Maine, we had the hottest summer in recorded history. All week, it's been 90 degrees here, which is totally uncharacteristic. So we're saying at Bath Iron Works, we should be building commuter rail systems, offshore wind turbines, tidal power systems, and more. This is the future that we need. Thank you, friends, for listening.
Oh, boy, thank you.
Thank you, Bruce, for that eye-opening presentation. We have some time, let's see, about 4 minutes before John Wilks will be presenting. So if people have questions they want to ask Bruce, go for it.
Paul, can you offer your suggestion there? We do have time to cover it if you can do it quickly.
Well, I can give it a shot. Are you talking to me, Lisa?
Yes, I am. Yes.
I was a part of the arms control endeavors in the 80s and 90s, but I've gotten away from it some. And I really appreciate hearing Bruce's tour de force on what's going on in this area. And it's really pretty horrifying. There was a time when arms control activities seemed to have some legs, but for various reasons, some of which were mentioned by Bruce, that seems no longer to be there. And one obvious signal of that is that our military budget keeps growing every year, despite of the fact that our budget and the whole NATO budget is so large compared to the rest of the world. So it's hard to have a question with such a tour de force. But I'm just wondering if Bruce has any ideas on how we can change the story, how we can reframe it. What can we do to get the attention not only of the public but of our Congress?
Well, sadly, I must say that I believe that Congress is under full control of the military-industrial complex, both parties. We know that. We see the campaign contributions. I see a question in there wondering about where your senators are on this. You know that Kirtland is a major directorate, a research directorate for all of these technologies. Right in your own community it's happening. They're working on all of these technologies. They've developed a laser at Kirtland that it's a ground-based laser, can fire a laser beam into space to take out another country's satellite. So they're working on all kinds of technologies at Kirtland. Your community is deep in it, just as mine is here in Bath. I don't spend much time lobbying politicians these days. Once I was on an airplane sitting next to a politician from Florida. He had a stack of newspapers in his lap, and the entire flight he went through every square inch of every newspaper. And I realized that a good politician always knows what's going on in their district or in their state. in this case. So I believe if you organize the people, educate the people, mobilize the people, then the politicians will follow. They will listen, they will begin to hear because they'll see the writing on the wall. So that's where I go with it. I put in the chat our website at the Global Network. Every month we do a space video. I urge you to go to our video section at our website and check out some of the videos that we're doing about various aspects of what's happening all around the world with this program. Because it's so expensive, remember I said earlier that Star Wars will be the largest industrial project in the history of the planet Earth. The US is essentially forcing the Allies to help pay for all of this, but the US will be in charge of the tip of the spear. The US will control the whole space technology apparatus to be the master of space. But Russia and China are not going down easy. They'd rather not have World War III. Russia lost 27, 28 million people in World War II. They know what war is. They don't want another war. They keep saying that over and over again. But they do say that we're not going to let anybody ever do to us again what Hitler did to us in World War II. And if you come at us, we're going to hit you back. We're going to hit you hard. And they mean it. The American people need to wake the hell up.
Thank you, Bruce, for the summary. And we go now to John Wilks, who's going to give a wrap up of the information we're getting tonight. So I'm going to spotlight. And John, I see that you're on Arla's computer now. Do you prefer that one to be spotlighted?
Yes, the speaker's better.
Okay, here we go. Okay, take it away, John.
Thank you for this opportunity to represent the Albuquerque chapter of Veterans for Peace on this distinguished panel. I will make a few observations of today's two previous presenters' presentations, and then I'll brief you on the priorities of our chapter. With regard to Mr. Gagnon's elucidating talk, I'd like to add that we are distressed over Senator Heinrich's unwavering support of all things nuclear in this state. He pushed for the U.S. Space Command establishing a headquarters here. He supported the labs, Los Alamos Labs expansion due to its mission shift from research to production. And he was very much supportive of the development of the B-61 warhead. Secondly, I'd like to highlight the outrageous involvement of the Kirkland Air Force Base in nuclear activities. The Kirkland hosts the Nuclear Weapons Complex. The complex includes the Nuclear Weapons Center, whose mission is to, quote, deliver nuclear capabilities warfighters use every day, unquote. The complex at Kirkland includes the Sandia Lab. It also includes the nation's largest depository of operational nuclear warheads, estimated at 2,500. Kirkland houses the Space Vehicle Directorate, the Airborne Laser System Program Office, which is the Starfire optical range hidden in the Manzano Mountains, the Operational Responsive Space Office, the School for Advanced Nuclear Deterrent Studies, and the Office of Secure Transportation of Nuclear Ordnance. We want all this activity to stop. We want Kirkland to divest of this mission and those units. Concerning Ms. Arends' very enlightening presentation, I'd like to point out that our chapter priorities are, first and most urgently, in the interests of social justice, we implore our congressional office holders to work diligently to extend the life of the Radiation Exposure Compensation Act of 1990, RECA, which will sunset July 10th, 2022. The scope of the act must be expanded to include New Mexican uranium miners, millers, or transporters, on-site weapon test participants, and downwinders, at the Trinity test site, as well as the Nevada test site detonations. Secondly, we must relentlessly pressure the DOE to clean up the 40,000 to 50,000 55-gallon drums or their equivalent containers of radioactive waste that are stranded and deteriorating at the Los Alamos lab. Since September 2020, the lab has shipped 0 waste to the WIPP due to an alleged lack of funding from DOE and the NNSA's non-compliance with the Defense Nuclear Facilities Safety Board requirements. We implore all elected officials at every level and state regulators to take affirmative and drastic steps to motivate DOE and NNSA to fund the cleanup of the entire footprint of the lab. Third, the waste isolation pilot plant WIPP must close on September 31st, 2024, as agreed upon when Congress authorized the WIPP in 1979. To safeguard the future of our state from further degradation, the WIPP must not remain open. It must not be expanded in size or volume, and it must not accept waste, which heretofore has been ineligible for admission. No downblending waste should be permitted to enter the WIPP. The U.S. Department of Interior, EPA, and Energy must be moved to begin the 10-year closure phase of the WIPP in 2024. Fourth, the Air Force must stop training F-16 pilots to deliver and launch nuclear weapons at Holloman. Fifth, we ought to stop calling the Los Alamos lab a laboratory and refer to it instead as a plutonium weapon plant. The label lab is a mere fig leaf for a dangerous, polluting, resource-consuming weapons manufacturing operation. When 83% of its operating budget for fiscal year 2021 was allocated to weapons production and related facilities conversion and upgrade, the scientific character of the lab was changed. Our chapter strongly opposes the shift of the mission of the plant and the establishment of this death factory in our midst. The squandering of our most precious natural resource, water, towards offensive weapons manufacturing is an outrage and an offense to all New Mexicans. All 3 of the missions assigned or contemplated for the plant are inappropriate. The plant will soon begin producing nuclear triggers for atomic weapons. It will downblend highly enriched uranium as received from many other sites across the nation for possible acceptance into the WIPP. And it will reconfigure some of the 20,000 plutonium pits now stored in the national stockpile, or the 4,500 plutonium pits held in our national reserve. Chapter 63 appreciates this opportunity tonight to share our vision with you and to invite you to work with us to create a nuclear weapons-free and nuclear waste-free future. Thank you.
Whoa.
Thank you, John. Are you able to share that list of topics with PDACNM so we can work together to prioritize the pressures we need to place on the institutions and politicians?
Sure. I will send you the script which I just read from.
And are you
And
okay with
which
us
I-
sharing it with PDACNM and the larger audience?
Yes, yes. I want to just add that my script is so current. It comes from a meeting that was held 2 days ago with the Department of Environmental Affairs in New Mexico. So it's got recent, just critically recent data.
Fabulous. I see Paul Stokes has his hand up.
Okay, I was just curious as to what has happened, if or why nothing has happened, as far as I know, regarding an analysis by I can't quite name the group now, but it's a prestigious group that's kind of monitored nuclear weapons affairs for years. And their study showed that the plutonium pits that we have in our current stockpile are good for 100 years. And that was intended to say that therefore we don't need all this new pit production, at least not for a long while. But I hear nothing about that. It's the Jason group. That's the group who did it. That Jason is an acronym, stands for something, but I don't know what. So what happened to that? Bill, do you know?
Well, that's the statement that they made, that statement you just said is a true statement. We do not need pits for any of the weapons that we now have. We will not need them for at least many decades. The issue is this. We have a triad, land, air, sea delivery. Right now, the defense contractors have gotten the missile caucus in Congress to say we not only need weapons, but we need the delivery systems also modernized. So they are trying to get rid of the Minuteman III intercontinental ballistic missile, which are now deployed in 5 different states in silos. They say, look, let's don't extend the life of the Minuteman III. Let's just scrap the Minuteman III and build an entire new set of missiles called the ground-based strategic deterrent. And on top of that weapon will be the W87-1 warhead. That is what the first mission of the LANL will be, create new pits for that new weapon. So if we could stop that weapon, we could stop the production of pits, at least for that weapon. But unfortunately, each of the forces, armed forces, has their own baby. And so the UK wants us to make a new submarine launched cruise missiles for their Trident subs, and other forces want us to make weapons for their, so the pit mission is going to continue whether we axe the ICBMs or not. We need to absolutely keep LANL from starting this down this road, making 20, 30, or 80 plutonium pits for these new weapons. We stop the pits, we stop the weapons, we stop the delivery system. They're all
Thank you,
linked.
John. We're at a point now where we have the community announcements and a final thank you. And Marcy, I put in the chat window a link to a petition site. So Marcy, do you want to discuss that, and then we'll open it to other announcements?
Yes, I want to thank all of you guys. You're right on, and we're on board. And if we can do anything to help, we want to. Our End Wars and Occupations team has been writing letters, and we did meet with Deb Holland, but Ben Ray and Martin won't even talk to us. Our governor won't answer our letters, even though we've sent dozens. We want to do everything we can to push back against this new pit factory. But I do want to point out, first of all, that most people don't know what these pits are. These are the core of the nuclear weapon that is radioactive, that causes mass destruction when you bomb somebody. I mean, and each one of the pits that they're making at LANL is 20 times as powerful as the bomb that leveled Hiroshima. So, and we already have 5,800 of them, but they're the NNSA wants to build more and more and more and more of them, which obviously we don't need. And it's all about money. It's this pit factory, this bomb factory at LANL is sitting right on top of the Pajarito Fault, an earthquake fault that is active. It's extremely dangerous and hazardous for us in New Mexico, and our governor won't even protect us or listen to our requests for her to talk to us. But what we're doing, what our group has done, is we have posted a petition on change.org, and it's in the chat there, change.org/no new nukes. And it isn't just a petition, it's really asking people to pledge to contact Biden on the White House comment page and tell him that we don't want to be building more nukes. We want to cut that money, funding for nukes, and spend it on real human needs like food and education and climate change and yada, yada. So it's all spelled out in the petition. I put it in that form just because it's one way to explain it, but it's not so much a petition that's going to go to Biden once we get a few million signatures. It's a pledge that we have to, everyone that you know, please let them know, everybody has to be contacting Biden. And if he gets flooded with a tsunami of comments from all around the country saying, we don't want these new nukes, spend the money on real needs, maybe, you know, it's one little thing that we're doing, and we're asking for all of your support to help and to forward it to everybody. So it's right up there, change.org, no new nukes. Thank you.
Thank you, Marcy. Any other community announcements or announcements about upcoming events? Don't be shy. Sally Ellis.
I wanted to let you know about a paper that Bruce edits and produces twice a year, Space Alert, and it's available to anybody who wants to make a small contribution to global network.
Thank you, Sally Ellis. And noticing that Elon Musk wants to launch all those satellites, he really doesn't care because he's moving to Mars anyway, so he's not too worried. Anybody else have an announcement? Okay, thank you, everybody. I think we have our work cut out for what we need to do to really hammer every politician that's coming up for elections, not to let them sidestep these important issues. We need to just bring these issues, all of them, up front and center when they run for office, and need to get them to sign off on changing their behavior or replace them with people that truly will address these issues. Lisa is going to do our closing, and I think you might have an announcement as well.
Well, it's not so much an announcement, it's a matter of the fact that I think a lot of us are going to lose a lot of sleep over this. We might use that time to become more involved and more educated on this subject, because it is I have not sat through an hour and a half of anything like this before in my mind. I mean, we've all got things that we are concerned about, things that we're doing, things that we're working on. That's what PDA is. That's what PDA National is. That's what so many other terrific groups are. But PDA does allow us to have these action teams, and we need to take this information to National PDA, and we need to take it to anyone that we can give it to. Our little community, the friends next door. As you said, this Bruce said, this probably is the only way to make a inroad, to do anything, and we don't seem to have a lot of time to do it. So PDA New Mexico, Central New Mexico, thanks you three for your absolutely magnificent presentation tonight. It will not be forgotten. We just need to decide that that we've got to all be involved, even as busy as we are with other issues, that this one is deadly. And thank you, Sally Ellis, for all you've done all your beautiful years, and for being on this team and bringing this to us. This was an idea you gave us, I think, 2 to 3 months ago, and it has totally come to fruition. We thank you all so very, very much. And Lloyd, thank you for all you did to make this happen with the Zoom. Appreciate you so much.
Thank you, Lisa, and thank you for everybody. I'm putting the link for the PDACNM website in the chat window. This presentation is being recorded, has been recorded, and will be available on that website at some point once we get it uploaded. So if you want to review it or know somebody that wants to watch it because they've missed it, you can have them get it from that website. Lisa, do you want to do a closing, an official closing? And then after that, I know people have missed some socializing. So what we've been doing is just leaving the Zoom link up and running. I'll stop the recording and people can socialize if they want.
I think I've said all I can say. I'm flabbergasted by all this. I've said it. Thank you so much, everyone. Our presenters in particular, of course, and our team, our action team, and all of you who tuned in tonight. So it's been eye-opening, and we need to recognize that. So whatever socializing we can do, it's good to see each other. One of these days we'll be looking at what we're going to do in the future, if we're going to continue this road or go back to a facility and meet together. But for the time being, let's socialize tonight and say hi.